Please like and subscribe to the channel if you find this video interesting. Enjoy watching the video. Arthur Pumble was a man born to blend in. Not in a cool, mysterious way, but in a way that made him practically invisible in the bustling open-plan office of Zenith Corporation. His existence was a carefully orchestrated symphony of beige cubicle walls, lukewarm coffee, and the ever-present hum of fluorescent lights. He was a junior marketing assistant, a title that sounded far grander than his actual duties, fetching lattes, organizing spreadsheets no one ever looked at, and occasionally being the unwitting recipient of Sarah Sterling's legendary displeasure. Sarah Sterling. The name alone struck a mild terror into the hearts of Zenith Corp employees, particularly those in her direct line of sight. At 29, she was a phenomenon, a dazzling comet of ambition, intelligence, and impeccably tailored power suits. She had ascended the corporate ladder with the speed of a cheetah on a rocket, transforming a struggling department into a market leader in less than 2 years. She was beautiful, undeniably so, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a perfectly coiffed blonde bob that seemed to defy gravity. But she was also, to put it mildly, intense. Her standards were not merely high, they were stratospheric. Perfection was her baseline, and anything less was grounds for a meticulously worded, yet utterly devastating, critique. Arthur, unfortunately, frequently fell short of even the Earth's atmosphere when it came to Sarah's expectations. His tie was perpetually slightly askew, his reports occasionally contained typos he swore the spell check missed on purpose, and his greatest ambition usually involved making it through Friday without a direct summons to her glass-walled office. This particular Tuesday was shaping up to be a classic Arthur meets Sarah disaster. He just delivered her usual triple shot, extra hot, non-fat, no foam latte, a beverage so specific it felt less like a coffee order and more like a secret agent's code, when her voice, sharp as a freshly sharpened pencil, cut through the office murmur. "Pumble. My office. Now." Arthur flinched so hard his own lukewarm coffee nearly sloshed over his hand. He trudged towards the formidable glass and chrome fortress, mentally replaying his morning. Had he forgotten to alphabetize the pens in the supply closet? Did he accidentally use Comic Sans in an internal memo? The possibilities for failure were endless with Sarah Sterling. As he entered, trying to look both professional and apologetic simultaneously, a difficult tightrope walk, Sarah was already tapping a perfectly manicured finger against a printed spreadsheet. Her expression was a subtle blend of annoyance and exasperation, a look Arthur knew well. "Pumble," she began, her voice dangerously calm, this Q2 marketing budget projection. "Tell me, what exactly is miscellaneous? £500. Arthur gulped. Well, Miss Sterling, that's just for incidentals. You know, unexpected costs. Like extra printer ink, or maybe an emergency office plant if the old one dies." Sarah raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "An emergency office plant, Pumble? Are we running a corporate office or a botanical garden prone to sudden vegetative collapse? Every single penny in this company is accounted for. I need specifics. Line items. Receipts. Not vague allocations for potential horticultural emergencies." She leaned back, her gaze sweeping over him, taking in his slightly rumpled shirt and the faint coffee stain near his collar. "Frankly, Pumble, your lack of attention to detail is a consistent challenge. We're launching the biggest campaign of the year next month, and I need a team that's sharp, precise, and completely focused. Not one that treats our finances like a piggy bank for incidentals and imaginary planned emergencies." Arthur felt his cheeks flush. He mumbled an apology, clutching his coffee cup like a lifeline. He wished he could just disappear, meld into the carpet, or perhaps spontaneously combust into a cloud of highly organized data. Anything to escape the piercing gaze of Sarah Sterling, the woman who made even spreadsheets tremble. He longed for a world where he was the one in charge, making the decisions, where he could demand perfection and clarity. And maybe, just maybe, where he didn't have to fetch anyone's triple shot, extra hot, non-fat, no foam latte ever again. And Sarah, looking at Arthur, saw not just an underperforming employee, but a symbol of everything she detested in the corporate world: mediocrity, a lack of drive, and a general air of beige. She wished, not for the first time, that she could inject some of her own ambition, her own meticulousness, her own fire into him. She wished she could show him what it was like to truly run things, to face the pressures, to make the difficult calls. If only, she thought, he could walk a mile in her ridiculously expensive, high-heeled shoes. Their silent wishes hung in the air, potent and unspoken, just as a strange, almost imperceptible shimmer passed through the glass walls of her office. Neither of them noticed. The next morning, the world felt different. Arthur Pumble woke with a start, not to the blare of his usual alarm, but to an insistent, high-pitched chirping. He slapped around blindly, expecting to hit his cheap digital clock, but his hand encountered something soft, silky, and distinctly unalarm clock-like. His eyes snapped open. He wasn't in his modest, slightly cluttered apartment bedroom. This room was enormous, bathed in a soft, expensive-looking light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. The bed he was in was king-sized, with an absurd number of plush pillows and a duvet that felt like sleeping on a cloud made of spun gold. Next to him, on a minimalist bedside table, was not his usual alarm, but a sleek, expensive smartphone, and it was emitting that irritating bird-like chirping. He stared at his hands. They were elegant. Long, slender fingers, perfectly manicured nails with a subtle, chic polish. My hands aren't like this, he thought, bewildered. His hands were usually a bit stubby, with nails that often bore the faint grime of forgotten coffee grounds. He scrambled out of bed, his heart thumping. The floor was cool marble. He looked down at himself and nearly screamed. He was wearing silk pajamas. And beneath the silk, he could vaguely make out curves, distinctly feminine curves. A frantic dash to the full-length mirror on the far wall confirmed his worst, most outlandish fear. Staring back at him was not Arthur Pumble. It was Sarah Sterling. Her perfectly coiffed blonde bob, now slightly mussed from sleep, her sharp, intelligent eyes, now wide with terror, her elegant features, it was all her. But inside, he was undeniably Arthur. A small, high-pitched shriek escaped his lips. It was Sarah's voice. His voice. He clapped a hand over his mouth, the silk sleeve feeling alien against his skin. This was impossible. He must be dreaming. A particularly vivid, deeply disturbing nightmare brought on by too much lukewarm coffee and too many Sarah Sterling critiques. He pinched himself. Hard. He yelped. It was real. Just then, the door to the bedroom swung open and a cheerful woman in a crisp uniform entered. "Good morning, Miss Sterling. Your coffee is ready, and your yoga instructor will be here in 20 minutes. Arthur stared, aghast. My yoga instructor," he stammered, his new voice cracking. The woman, a housekeeper he presumed, looked slightly puzzled. "Yes, Miss Sterling. As per your usual Tuesday schedule." Arthur, or rather Sarah, fled into the massive, pristine ensuite bathroom. He splashed cold water on his face, watching Sarah Sterling's reflection stare back at him. This was not just a nightmare, this was a 5-star, luxury suite nightmare. Meanwhile, in a considerably smaller and significantly messier apartment across town, Sarah Sterling was having an equally rude awakening. She woke to the abrasive, tinny sound of a pop-rock song she vaguely recognized as something the office radio occasionally played. Her eyes flew open, expecting to see the minimalist elegance of her own bedroom. Instead, she was greeted by a ceiling fan with one wobbly blade, a stack of comic books precariously balanced on a bedside table, and a faint, vaguely stale odor she couldn't quite place. She sat up, her head throbbing. Her silk pajamas were gone, replaced by a threadbare, slightly too large t-shirt and boxer shorts. She looked down at her hands. They were stubby, and a faint coffee stain marred the back of one, right near the knuckles. Panic flared. She launched herself out of bed, tripping over a discarded sneaker. This was not her elegant stride. This was a clumsy, almost lumbering gait. She stumbled towards the full-length mirror on the back of the closet door, her heart hammering against her ribs. And there he was. Arthur Pumble. His slightly receding hairline, his perpetually bewildered expression, now amplified by sheer terror, his rather unremarkable features, it was all him. But inside, she was undeniably Sarah. "What?" she shrieked, but the sound that came out was a deep, slightly reedy male voice. Her voice. She clapped her hands over her mouth, the unfamiliar, rough skin feeling alien. This was utterly, unequivocally impossible. Just then, her alarm clock, a cheap, plastic digital one she now realized, blared again. She fumbled with it, eventually succeeding in silencing the dreadful noise. Her phone, a somewhat outdated model she recognized as Arthur's, buzzed with a message. A reminder. Don't forget to pick up dry cleaning. Sarah stared at her reflection in the mirror, her mind reeling. She was Arthur Pumble, trapped in the body of the most disorganized, least ambitious man she knew. The man who couldn't even properly budget for an emergency office plant. This wasn't just a nightmare. This was a personal hell, custom designed to inflict maximum psychological torture. The first thought that sprang to her mind, even amidst the chaos, was, how am I going to get to the office? And what about the Q2 budget meeting? The initial shock slowly gave way to a dawning, horrifying realization for both Arthur and Sarah. They had to go to work. As the other person, Arthur, inhabiting Sarah's body, felt a wave of nausea. He, Arthur Pumble, the master of beige and invisibility, had to embody the formidable Sarah Sterling. He had to command, to critique, to exude an aura of ruthless efficiency. He could barely command his own 2 feet without tripping. He tried to recall Sarah's morning routine. He vaguely remembered her telling someone off for a misplaced agenda item during a pre-meeting once. That was about the extent of his knowledge of her daily life. He found an impossibly chic, minimalist closet filled with rows of expensive suits, dresses, and a truly dizzying array of high heels. He picked a sensible, dark blue pantsuit, grateful it didn't involve a skirt. The shoes, however, were another matter. Sarah's usual stilettos felt like instruments of torture. He settled for a pair of slightly lower, but still precarious, block heels. Each step was a minor miracle of balance. Applying makeup was a disaster. He remembered Sarah always looked perfectly put together, but trying to recreate that magic with unfamiliar brushes and tubes resulted in a patchy, clown-like mess. He eventually gave up, splashing water on his face and hoping for the best. He felt utterly exposed, a sheep in wolf's clothing, convinced everyone at Zenith Corp would see straight through his clumsy impersonation. As he descended in Sarah's private elevator, which was far too silent and smooth for his liking, Arthur practiced a stern expression in the polished steel doors. It came out looking more like he was constipated. He sighed, a distinctly un-Sarah-like sound. What would Sarah do? He wondered. She'd probably already have 3 deals closed and an intern crying in the corner by now. Meanwhile, in Arthur's body, Sarah was battling a different kind of horror, the sheer incompetence of Arthur's life. First, the clothes. Arthur's wardrobe consisted primarily of ill-fitting shirts, baggy trousers, and a collection of novelty ties. She chose the least offensive combination she could find, but even then, the fabric felt cheap and uncomfortable against her skin. Then, breakfast. Arthur's fridge contained half a carton of milk, a wilting lettuce, and a questionable leftover pizza slice. She, who usually started her day with a meticulously prepared smoothie and artisanal granola, felt a wave of primal disgust. She settled for instant coffee, a beverage she usually considered an insult to the bean. The commute was another revelation. Arthur's trusty, albeit dented, sedan was a far cry from her sleek, chauffeured executive car. The radio was stuck on a local news channel, and the seats were lumpy. She tried to navigate the morning traffic, fuming at every slow driver, every poorly timed traffic light. Her usual calm, strategic mind was in overdrive, yet hampered by the unfamiliar male body and its lack of grace. As she drove, she tried to channel Arthur. What was his typical demeanor? Slumped shoulders, a slight shuffle, an air of quiet apprehension. She tried to mimic it, but it felt like wearing a suit several sizes too big. Every instinct screamed for efficiency, for control, for her usual executive presence. But she was Arthur Pumble, the man who couldn't be trusted with an emergency office plant. Walking into Zenith Corp as Arthur was an experience in itself. No knowing nods, no hushed greetings. Just the usual flurry of office activity, with people barely glancing his way. He even overheard someone whisper, "Oh look, Pumble's finally in on time for once." He marched directly to his cubicle, ignoring the urge to snap orders and demand updates. His desk was a monument to mild disarray, a stack of unfiled papers, a half-eaten granola bar, a collection of novelty stress balls. Sarah felt a faint tremor of despair. This was her life now, surrounded by beige and Pumble. Then, the moment of truth arrived. The elevator doors to the executive floor opened, and out stepped Sarah Sterling. Except it wasn't Sarah Sterling. Not really. Arthur, in Sarah's body, tried to project authority. He strode, or rather, wobbled with determination, towards his office, attempting to avoid eye contact with anyone, especially his, now her, former colleagues. He caught a glimpse of himself in a reflective pillar, the expensive suit, the perfectly styled hair. Somehow it had mostly stayed, but the eyes were wide, slightly terrified, and distinctly Pumble-ish. He spotted Arthur, now Sarah, heading for his cubicle. For a split second, their eyes met across the vast office floor. A jolt, a flash of recognition, passed between them. In that brief, shared glance, all the confusion, the terror, the sheer absurdity of their situation coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. They were stuck. And they had to pretend that everything was perfectly normal. Arthur, as Sarah, cleared his throat, trying to sound imperious. "Pumble. My office. 10 minutes. And bring the revised Q2 budget projection. The detailed one." He winced inwardly. He was supposed to know what that was. Sarah, as Arthur, felt a surge of indignation. The detailed one? She had just woken up in this man's body, navigated his abysmal life, and now she was being ordered around by herself? The irony was almost too much to bear. She forced her new, lower voice to respond. "Yes, Miss Sterling." The words tasted like ash. The game was on. The first few hours were a masterclass in controlled panic for both of them. Arthur, trapped in Sarah's formidable executive chair, found the power intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. He had always imagined being in charge, but the reality was a barrage of complex reports, urgent phone calls, and demanding subordinates. He pretended to read emails with intense concentration, nodding sagely while his mind raced, trying to decipher corporate jargon he'd only ever heard in passing. When he had to speak, he tried to mimic Sarah's crisp, authoritative tone, but it often came out a pitch too high or too low, punctuated by nervous throat clearing. His first real challenge was a phone call from a major investor. Arthur, whose usual phone calls involved ordering pizza, suddenly had to discuss market trends and projected ROI. He stammered through the conversation, throwing out buzzwords he remembered from presentations: synergy, paradigm shift, value proposition, hoping they made sense. Miraculously, the investor seemed satisfied, largely because Arthur, in Sarah's body, instinctively adopted Sarah's posture and commanding presence, even if his words were a jumbled mess. He hung up, wiping a bead of sweat from Sarah's perfectly sculpted forehead. This was exhausting. Then came the Q2 budget meeting. Sarah, in Arthur's body, entered, clutching a printout of the budget she had hastily familiarized herself with. Her heart sank when she saw Arthur, in Sarah's body, at the head of the table, looking paler than usual. He cleared his throat. "All right, team, let's get straight to it. Pumble, your revised Q2 budget. Talk us through it." Sarah, in Arthur's body, stood up. She took a deep breath, channeling all of Sarah Sterling's executive fire. "Certainly, Miss Sterling." She launched into a detailed explanation, her voice, Arthur's voice, but with Sarah's conviction, surprisingly steady. She dissected the numbers, pointed out potential inefficiencies, and even proposed a clever cost-saving measure that had everyone nodding. Arthur, watching himself deliver such a brilliant presentation, felt a strange mix of pride and utter bewilderment. He'd never known he, or rather, Sarah as him, was capable of such eloquence. But then Arthur, as Sarah, faced his own challenge. A sharp-eyed finance director, Mr. Henderson, piped up, "Miss Sterling, I have a query about the miscellaneous allocation. It seems to have quadrupled since the last draft. What precisely is this for?" Arthur's blood ran cold. He had seen the number. In his panic that morning, trying to make the budget look more detailed, he had simply multiplied his original miscellaneous by 4, thinking bigger numbers meant more importance. He opened his mouth, but no intelligent answer came out. He just blinked. Sarah, as Arthur, quickly interjected, her mind racing. "If I may, Miss Sterling, I believe that increase is to cover potential unforeseen marketing opportunities in the rapidly evolving digital landscape. We're anticipating a need for flexible allocation to capitalize on viral trends that emerge quickly, requiring immediate investment." She looked at Arthur, as Sarah, with a pointed glare, practically willing him to agree. Arthur, as Sarah, seized on the lifeline. "Precisely, Pumble. Excellent point. Agility in a volatile market." He tried to look thoughtful and profound, but inside, he was screaming with relief. Sarah, his Sarah, had just saved his bacon. The meeting continued, with Sarah, as Arthur, subtly guiding Arthur, as Sarah, through the trickier points, often by asking leading questions or offering helpful clarifications. It was an odd dance, a bizarre corporate puppetry, but somehow, they made it through. Later that afternoon, Arthur, as Sarah, found himself facing another personal challenge, a meeting with his, now her, personal trainer. The trainer, a strapping young man named Chad, greeted him with an overly enthusiastic smile. "Ready for your core blasting, glitch shredding session, Miss Sterling?" Arthur, who considered walking to the vending machine a workout, felt genuine terror. He tried to politely decline, but Chad was relentless. What followed was a humiliating half-hour of Arthur attempting to perform squats, planks, and lunges in Sarah's toned, but unfamiliar body. He groaned, he wobbled, he nearly pulled a muscle he didn't even know Sarah possessed. Chad looked increasingly perplexed. "Are you feeling all right, Miss Sterling? You're usually a beast." Meanwhile, Sarah, as Arthur, was struggling with her own set of new responsibilities. Her phone, Arthur's phone, kept buzzing with messages from his mother, asking if he'd remembered to water her prize-winning orchids. There was also a mysterious message from someone named Brenda asking if he was free for board game night. Sarah had never played a board game in her life that didn't involve corporate strategy. Later, she had to fetch coffees. For herself. It was an indignity she had never imagined. As she carried the tray of lattes, she accidentally bumped into Brenda, a cheerful, slightly gossipy HR assistant. "Hey, Arthur," Brenda chirped. "You look a bit intense today. Everything all right?" Sarah, still wrestling with Arthur's perpetually slumped posture, forced a tight smile. "Fine, Brenda. Just focused." She realized she'd sounded exactly like Sarah Sterling. She quickly tried to soften her expression, adding, "Busy day, you know?" Brenda looked at her curiously. "Yeah, I get it. Say, remember that promotion opportunity in the international division you were thinking about? I think applications close tomorrow." Sarah's ears perked up. A promotion opportunity? For Arthur? Her executive mind instantly began calculating the strategic advantages. This could be a way out for Arthur, a step up. A way for her to improve his life. Back in Sarah's office, Arthur stared at the mirror. He looked like Sarah, but felt entirely unlike her. He missed his own comfortable, if unremarkable, life. He missed his old body, his old clothes, his old, low-stakes problems. He missed being invisible. This was too much pressure, too much responsibility. He wasn't Sarah Sterling. And he had no idea how to keep up the charade. The only silver lining was realizing how much work Sarah actually did. He never gave her enough credit for all the miscellaneous chaos she had to navigate. The days bled into a bizarre routine. Arthur, as Sarah, found himself surprisingly adept at the high-pressure world of executive decisions, mostly thanks to Sarah's meticulously organized systems and the invaluable, albeit unwitting, help of his new assistant, a stern but efficient woman named Ms. Albright. He learned to delegate, to bark orders, though often with a slight tremor in his new voice, and to project an air of confidence he absolutely did not feel. He discovered Sarah's vast network of contacts, her impressive foresight, and the immense weight of responsibility she carried daily. He even started to enjoy the perks, the gourmet lunch deliveries, the reserved parking space, the sheer power of being able to make things happen with a single phone call. But he also faced Sarah's personal life. Her calendar was a dizzying array of charity galas, exclusive dinners, and networking events. He had to learn to schmooze, to make polite small talk with influential figures, and to maintain an air of sophistication he simply didn't possess. One evening, at a black-tie corporate fundraiser, he nearly choked on a canopy while trying to explain Zenith Corp's Q3 projections to a wealthy industrialist, only to be rescued by a subtle, almost imperceptible nudge from Brenda, who was also there, looking stunning. "Miss Sterling, perhaps you meant to elaborate on our sustainable growth initiatives?" Brenda whispered, stepping in with a dazzling smile and perfectly segueing into a topic Arthur actually knew a little about. He caught her eye, a flicker of gratitude passing between them. Brenda was more than just a gossipy HR assistant, he realized. She was surprisingly sharp and genuinely helpful. He began to see Sarah's network of acquaintances in a new light, not just as distant colleagues, but as potential allies. Meanwhile, Sarah, as Arthur, was plunged into the mundane, often baffling, world of junior corporate life. She fetched coffees, organized mundane spreadsheets, and attended team meetings where her suggestions, delivered in Arthur's mild-mannered voice, were often politely ignored or credited to someone else. The sheer inefficiency of it all drove her mad. She watched as her own corporate body, Arthur's body, in the CEO's office made a bold, strategic decision that would normally have taken weeks of deliberation, and she felt a surge of professional pride, quickly followed by the crushing realization that she was currently sorting paper clips. However, she also discovered Arthur's hidden depths. His quirky sense of humor, often expressed in subtle, self-deprecating jokes that few people picked up on. His surprising kindness to the new intern who was struggling. His quiet dedication to helping his elderly neighbor with groceries. And his board game nights. Brenda, it turned out, was a regular attendee, along with a couple of other office colleagues Sarah had barely noticed before. One evening, Sarah, as Arthur, found herself at Arthur's apartment, awkwardly playing a complex fantasy board game. She, who usually spent her evenings reviewing financial statements, was now strategizing about conquering imaginary kingdoms with plastic figures. She was terrible at it, but Brenda and the others were patient, laughing good-naturedly at her, Arthur's, mistakes. Brenda, seeing her, Arthur's, frustration, leaned over. "Don't worry, Arthur, it takes a while. You're usually so good at this though, what's up?" Sarah, caught off guard, stammered, "Just a lot on my mind at work." Brenda nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, Miss Sterling can be tough. But she's brilliant, you know? She really cares about the company, even if she doesn't always show it. A bit of a dragon lady sometimes, but a dragon lady who gets results." Sarah, in Arthur's body, felt a strange warmth. To hear someone speak of her with such a mix of respect and understanding was unexpectedly pleasant. She suddenly understood why Arthur tolerated the demanding nature of his job. He found community, friendships, and a quiet sense of purpose in the small moments. As the weeks passed, a curious thing began to happen. Arthur, inhabiting Sarah's body, started to loosen up. He realized that Sarah's formidable reputation often did half the work for him. He found himself laughing more freely, making executive decisions with a confidence he never knew he possessed, and even discovering a talent for public speaking, especially after a few practice runs in front of Sarah's expensive bathroom mirror. He realized Sarah wasn't just a demanding boss. She was incredibly intelligent, fiercely loyal to her company, and surprisingly vulnerable beneath the polished exterior. He even found himself defending her, himself, in conversations with other executives, a protective instinct he never knew he had. Sarah, inhabiting Arthur's body, started to appreciate the small victories. She meticulously organized Arthur's cubicle, creating an efficient workflow system that earned her, an unexpected commendation from a department manager. She helped the struggling intern not just with work, but with advice on navigating corporate politics, advice gleaned from years at the top. She even started enjoying board game nights, finding a simple pleasure in the camaraderie. She began to see Arthur not as a mediocre employee, but as a genuinely kind, observant, and resilient person, someone who cared deeply about the people around him, even if he didn't have the grand ambitions she did. She also noticed that Arthur, in her body, was handling things surprisingly well. He was growing into her shoes. One particularly stressful afternoon, Arthur, as Sarah, found himself trapped in a high-stakes negotiation with a notoriously difficult client. The deal was crucial for Zenith Corporation. He felt himself crumbling under the pressure, the legal jargon and financial figures swimming before his eyes. He frantically texted Arthur's phone. Help. Contract law. Article 7. I'm lost. Moments later, Sarah, as Arthur, appeared at his office door, looking concerned. Miss Sterling, I believe you requested clarification on Article 7, she asked, a subtle code for, I know you're panicking, let me help. Together, in a hushed consultation, Sarah, as Arthur, quickly guided Arthur, as Sarah, through the nuances of the contract, her sharp legal mind kicking into gear. Arthur, grateful beyond words, absorbed the information and, with a newfound surge of confidence, closed the deal, securing a massive win for the company. As Sarah, as Arthur, left the office, she looked back at her own body, now occupied by Arthur, smiling genuinely at the client. A strange, unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. This bizarre body swap wasn't just a punishment, it was a bizarre, uncomfortable, yet oddly enlightening experience. And she realized, with a jolt, that she was actually starting to, like Arthur Pumble. The shared secret, the constant need to cover for each other, and the enforced immersion in each other's lives forged an undeniable, if unconventional, bond between Arthur and Sarah. Their daily text exchanges had evolved from frantic pleas for help to a more relaxed, almost companionable banter. Just had to sit through a 3-hour presentation on artisanal vegan snacks, Arthur, as Sarah, texted one afternoon. My brain feels like kale. Send help. And a steak. Sarah, as Arthur, replied almost instantly. Try dealing with Mrs. Higgins from accounting trying to explain her cat's dietary requirements for an expense report. I yearn for kale. And silence. They found themselves developing a strange shorthand, an understanding that transcended their previous animosity. They knew each other's professional strengths and weaknesses intimately, but more importantly, they were discovering each other's personal quirks, dreams, and vulnerabilities. Arthur learned that Sarah, despite her intimidating exterior, secretly volunteered at an animal shelter on weekends. Sarah learned that Arthur, beneath his quiet demeanor, wrote surprisingly insightful, if slightly melodramatic, poetry in his spare time. One evening, Arthur, as Sarah, attended a charity gala he couldn't gracefully get out of. He hated these events, the forced smiles, the endless small talk. But as he navigated the ballroom, he spotted Brenda, looking radiant in a shimmering emerald gown. She caught his eye and smiled, a genuine, warm smile. Arthur, as Sarah, felt a strange flutter in his chest. He hadn't really thought of Brenda beyond her role as Arthur's friend and colleague. But seeing her now, outside the office, she was simply captivating. He found himself drawn to her, and they spent a good portion of the evening chatting, laughing, and even dancing. Arthur, as Sarah, was clumsy, stepping on her foot once or twice, but Brenda just laughed, her hand resting lightly on his arm, Sarah's arm, but it felt like his arm. The evening ended with Brenda giving him, Sarah's body, a warm hug and saying, you know, Miss Sterling, you've been different lately. In a good way. More human. Arthur, as Sarah, walked home that night, a goofy smile on Sarah's face. He realized he had just had a really nice time with Brenda. And a terrifying thought struck him. Was he, Arthur Pumble, falling for Brenda while in Sarah Sterling's body? The absurdity of it all made him want to laugh and cry simultaneously. Meanwhile, Sarah, as Arthur, was facing her own romantic conundrum. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of fetching coffees and dealing with a paper jam, she found herself walking home. As she passed a small, independent bookstore, she noticed a familiar figure through the window, Sarah Sterling, Arthur's body, engrossed in a literary classic. Sarah, as Arthur, paused, watching herself. Arthur, in her body, looked surprisingly at peace, a soft smile gracing her lips as she turned a page. He looked good. She had never really looked at Arthur before, not truly. She had only seen him as an employee, a problem. But now, seeing him in her body, so calm, so engaged, so utterly uncorporate, a different kind of feeling stirred within her. He looked up, meeting her eye. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. Arthur's body. He waved her in. Sarah, as Arthur, hesitated, then walked inside. Arthur, as Sarah said, his voice, Sarah's voice, surprisingly gentle. Fancy seeing you here. Sarah, as Arthur, felt a blush creep up Arthur's neck. Just browsing. You look comfortable. Arthur, as Sarah, chuckled. This is a nice escape from the usual. Sometimes, even the CEO needs a break from synergy. He gave her a knowing wink. They ended up spending the next hour talking, not about work, but about books, about life, about their strange situation. Sarah, as Arthur, found herself laughing at Arthur's dry wit, something she'd never noticed before. And Arthur, as Sarah, found himself enjoying Sarah's surprisingly insightful observations on human nature, even when delivered in his own slightly reedy voice. As they parted ways, Sarah, as Arthur, felt a strange, unsettling warmth spread through her. She was undeniably attracted to the person inside her own body. To Arthur Pumble, the man she had once considered utterly beneath her. This was beyond confusing. The next few days at work were a minefield of emotional awkwardness. Arthur, as Sarah, kept catching himself looking at Brenda with a longing he couldn't ignore, but he was in Sarah's body. How could he possibly act on that? And Brenda was still interacting with him as Miss Sterling. Sarah, as Arthur, found herself observing Arthur, as Sarah, with a heightened awareness. Every gesture, every smile, every exasperated sigh. She saw the true Arthur Pumble shining through her own face, and she found it charming. And the idea of Arthur falling for someone else while in her body, even Brenda, sent a pang of something akin to jealousy through her. Her body. His feelings. It was a tangled mess. The biggest plot twist wasn't just the body swap itself, but the unexpected romantic feelings blooming in the most inconvenient and confusing of ways. They were falling for each other, and for others, all while inhabiting the wrong skin. The comedy was reaching peak absurdity. The emotional turmoil for both Arthur and Sarah reached a fever pitch. The longing glances, the subtle shifts in their interactions, the desperate attempts to understand their own confusing feelings, it was becoming unbearable. One afternoon, Arthur, as Sarah, received a text from Brenda. Hey, Miss Sterling, any chance you're free for coffee sometime this week? Just a friendly chat. Arthur's heart pounded. This was it. A chance to connect with Brenda, but as Sarah. He typed out a reply, his elegant fingers hovering over the keys. I'd love to, Brenda. How about tomorrow, 3 p.m. at the Daily Grind? He sent it, then instantly regretted it. What was he doing? He was in Sarah's body. This was an emotional train wreck waiting to happen. He immediately texted Arthur's phone. Brenda asked me, you, for coffee. What do I do? This is a nightmare. Sarah, as Arthur, was at his cubicle, trying to file away a stack of old memos when the frantic text came in. She felt a sharp, unexpected jab of jealousy. Brenda, asking her body out? Even if it was for coffee, the thought was unsettling. She sighed, then replied, just go. Be yourself as much as you can be in my body. And don't spill anything. She added, with a touch of exasperation, and maybe try to find out what she thinks of Arthur Pumble for future reference. The next day, Arthur, as Sarah, met Brenda. He tried to act like Sarah, but Brenda's easygoing nature made it impossible. He found himself genuinely laughing, sharing anecdotes, and even letting slip a few of Arthur's more self-deprecating jokes. Brenda seemed utterly charmed. "You know," Brenda said, stirring her latte, "I always thought you were so formidable, Miss Sterling. Unapproachable. But lately you've been so much warmer. It's lovely. And sometimes," she leaned in conspiratorially, "you remind me a little of Arthur. He has that same quiet charm beneath the surface." Arthur, as Sarah, felt a blush creep up Sarah's neck. "Oh, really? Arthur, you say?" Brenda nodded. "Yeah. He's a good guy, Arthur. A bit of a mess sometimes, but his heart's in the right place. We have board game nights, you know. He's actually brilliant at Settlers of Catan." A pang went through Arthur, as Sarah. Brenda liked him. The real him. But she was seeing him in Sarah's body. This was truly deeply messed up. Meanwhile, Sarah, as Arthur, was facing her own crisis. She had agreed to help Arthur's mother with a computer issue, a long-standing promise from Arthur. So there she was, in Arthur's childhood home, trying to fix a printer while fielding questions about her love life. "So, dear, any special lady friends?" Arthur's mother asked, beaming. "Brenda from HR is such a sweet girl, isn't she? And she always asks about you." Sarah, as Arthur, felt her face flush. "Brenda is very nice, Mrs. Pumble." The thought of Brenda potentially developing feelings for Arthur, the real Arthur, and not the one currently occupying his body, was surprisingly painful. Just then, her phone buzzed. A text from Arthur's body, from her phone. "Help. Gala tonight. Need to present a speech. I've never done public speaking as Sarah before. My knees are actual jelly. What would you, say about corporate responsibility?" Sarah, as Arthur, sighed, then a mischievous idea sparked. She quickly typed out a series of bullet points, meticulously crafted to sound like Sarah Sterling, but with a subtle, underlying warmth and focus on community that Arthur had discovered in her. She sent it, then added, "And remember that time you told me about your poetry? Inject a little passion into it. It's your time to shine, Pumble." Later that evening, at the Zenith Corp Gala, Arthur, as Sarah, stood on stage, clutching the speech Sarah had sent him. He took a deep breath. He looked out at the sea of faces, including Brenda's, who was smiling encouragingly. He began to speak, initially wooden, but as he delved into the points Sarah had provided, and added a touch of his own genuine enthusiasm for community, something shifted. He spoke with a passion he didn't know he possessed, conveying a vision of corporate responsibility that was both intelligent and genuinely heartfelt. He even managed to incorporate a subtle, poetic flourish at the end that brought a ripple of applause. As he stepped off stage, Brenda rushed up to him. "Miss Sterling, that was incredible. Truly inspiring. I've never heard you speak with so much soul." She hugged him, a surprisingly warm, genuine embrace that made Arthur, as Sarah, feel a jolt of something electric. He hugged her back, his mind awhirl. He glanced across the room and saw Sarah, as Arthur, watching him, a small, proud smile on her face. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something clicked into place. The attraction wasn't for Brenda, not really. It was for the connection, the shared understanding, the unexpected camaraderie that had blossomed between him and Sarah. The same realization hit Sarah, as Arthur, with full force. Watching Arthur, in her body, speak with such passion, such authentic conviction, she saw the man she had come to know and respect, the man she was falling for. It wasn't just about seeing herself achieve greatness, it was about him achieving it in her shoes. And the pang of jealousy she felt when Brenda hugged her body was undeniable. She didn't want Brenda to fall for her body, she wanted Brenda to fall for Arthur. But more accurately, she realized, she wanted Arthur to fall for her. The next day, both of them knew they couldn't continue like this. They met in a deserted park during lunch, sitting on a bench, looking utterly incongruous in their swapped bodies. "This is insane," Arthur, as Sarah, said, running a hand through Sarah's perfect blonde hair. I think I'm falling for you, Sarah." Sarah, as Arthur, stared at him, her heart thumping in Arthur's chest. "I think I'm falling for you too, Arthur." The admission hung in the air, ridiculous and utterly sincere. They looked at each other, the wrong faces reflecting the right emotions. Just then, a strange, shimmering light enveloped them, more intense than the one before. It swirled around them, brighter and brighter, until they had to close their eyes. The shimmering light intensified, a whirlwind of vibrant colors and a strange, tingling sensation that coursed through every fiber of their being. It was disorienting, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. Then, as suddenly as it began, it vanished, leaving them blinking in the gentle afternoon sun of the park. Arthur slowly opened his eyes. He looked down at his hands. They were his. Stubby, slightly calloused, and bearing the faint, familiar smudge of coffee. He let out a gasp. He was wearing his slightly rumpled shirt and baggy trousers. He was Arthur Pumble. Sarah, beside him, let out a small, elegant shriek. She looked down at her own hands, long, slender fingers, perfectly manicured nails. She felt the familiar weight of her expensive suit, the tailored fabric, the sharp angles of her own body. She was Sarah Sterling. They stared at each other, wide-eyed, relief and disbelief warring on their faces. It happened, Arthur whispered, his own voice sounding foreign and wonderful to his ears. "We're back," Sarah confirmed, her voice crisp and authoritative, yet with an unmistakable tremor. A beat of silence passed between them, then they both burst into laughter. A genuine, unrestrained peal of mirth that echoed through the quiet park. It was the laughter of two people who had just experienced the most surreal, utterly insane journey of their lives, and had somehow emerged sane and, perhaps, even better for it. "You know," Arthur said, wiping a tear of laughter from his eye, "being you was intense. And terrifying. And surprisingly fun." Sarah smiled, a softer, more genuine smile than Arthur had ever seen on her face before. "And being you, Pumble, was a revelation. I never realized how much courage it takes to just keep showing up, day after day, in the face of my particular management style." They looked at each other, the awkwardness of their confessions from moments before now replaced by a comfortable familiarity. The feelings were still there, undeniable, but now they were housed in the right bodies, making them feel less like a cosmic joke and more like a hopeful truth. "So," Arthur began, a shy smile touching his lips, "about what I said, when I was you." Sarah's eyes twinkled. "And what I said, when I was you." She paused, then took a brave step forward, reaching out a hand. "Arthur Pumble, you are the most surprisingly kind, resilient, and insightful man I've ever met." Arthur took her hand, his heart soaring. "Sarah Sterling, you are the most brilliant, passionate, and utterly captivating woman I've ever had the displeasure of working for." He grinned, then added, "Though, I think I rather like working with you now." Sarah laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "I think I like that idea too, Pumble." Life at Zenith Corp transformed. Sarah Sterling was still formidable, still brilliant, but there was a new warmth, a new empathy to her. She delegated more effectively, listened more intently, and even, occasionally, brought in a homemade cake for the office, a skill she'd picked up while in Arthur's body, much to everyone's surprise. Her critiques were still sharp, but now often delivered with a constructive edge and, sometimes, even a knowing wink towards Arthur. Arthur Pumble, for his part, was no longer invisible. He stood taller, spoke with more confidence, and his reports were now meticulously detailed, no more emergency office plants. He still had his quirky humor, but now he shared it more freely, often making Sarah smile during stressful meetings. He even applied for that promotion in the international division, with Sarah's enthusiastic backing, and got it. He was moving up, no longer just blending in, but shining in his own right. And their relationship? It blossomed beautifully, albeit with its own unique quirks. Their first official date was to a board game night at Arthur's apartment, where Sarah, now in her own body, proved to be a surprisingly fierce, if still slightly inexperienced, opponent at Settlers of Caton. Brenda, initially bewildered by the sudden shift in Ms. Sterling's personality and Arthur's newfound confidence, quickly became a supportive friend, often teasing them about their secret executive meetings. Their office colleagues noticed the change. The Dragon Lady and the Coffee Boy were often seen sharing quiet smiles across the office, their conversations laced with inside jokes no one else understood. They would sometimes catch each other's eye during a particularly tense meeting, and a silent, knowing understanding would pass between them, a reminder of the crazy journey they'd shared. One evening, a few months later, as they walked home hand in hand after a late dinner, Arthur squeezed Sarah's hand. "You know," he said, "I never thought I'd say this, but thank you for being you. And for letting me be you." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "And thank you, Arthur, for being you. And for showing me what it's like to really see things from a different perspective." She looked up at him, her eyes shining. "I love you, Arthur Pumble." Arthur smiled, a warmth spreading through him that was far better than any lukewarm coffee. "I love you too, Sarah Sterling. Even if you still insist on triple shot, extra hot, non-fat, no foam lattes." Sarah just chuckled, her arms slipping around his waist. They continued their walk, two very different people whose lives had been irrevocably and wonderfully intertwined by a single, inexplicable body swap. Their love story, forged in chaos and confusion, was now a perfect blend of high-powered ambition and quiet, unexpected charm. A true comedy romance indeed.